Imagine waking up to hundreds of notifications on your phone, all from companies you've never heard of, asking about health insurance, home renovations, assisted living, college enrollment. The list goes on. And to top it off, it turns out someone took the time to create fake Craigslist ads with your phone number on them. But you have no idea why this is happening or who would go through such lengths to mess with you. Now who could be behind it? It was a typical Friday evening, nothing out of the ordinary. After a long week, I was just looking forward to some downtime with my family. A bit of relaxation and maybe even a few rounds of a silly game. My husband had been busy all day with an event for kids involved in martial arts, so I decided to take our kids out for a bit to give him space to work. We ended up going to the park. The weather was perfect, not too hot, and the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. The kids ran around, laughing and playing, while I watched from a nearby bench. There's something peaceful about watching your children be free, isn't there? It felt like the perfect evening. Afterwards, we grabbed dinner from a small casual spot nearby. Nothing fancy, just a local diner, but the food was comforting. We had burgers, fries, and a couple of milkshakes. Simple stuff. But you know those meals that make you feel content in a way you didn't expect. That was one of those. After we finished eating, we decided to swing by and watch the hot air balloons drifting in the distance as the sky turned a deep purple. It was beautiful and calming, a far cry from the chaos that would soon unfold. The night was winding down. We came back home, and the kids immediately jumped into a few rounds of Ultimate Chicken Horse, a quirky little game where you build obstacles while trying to outsmart your friends. It was a fun way to unwind, and we were all laughing, enjoying the moments together. I wasn't thinking about anything else. There was no work on my mind, no stress, just this simple family time that I cherished. My husband came home later in the evening, tired from his event. We said our goodnights, and I headed to bed at a decent hour, anticipating the quiet Saturday morning ahead. No drama, no worries. But the next morning, things took an entirely different turn. It started subtly at first. My phone buzzed beside me on the nightstand, and I thought it was just a message from a friend or something simple. But then it buzzed again and again until I had several notifications piling up. I gradually picked up my phone to check what was going on. Text after text poured in, all from unfamiliar numbers. I saw one that read, "Following up on your inquiry about health insurance." Another one said, "We received your request for home renovations." Then one about assisted living options for your mother. There were even a few about going back to college and investment management. My mind was spinning. What was going on? I didn't remember filling out any forms or inquiring about anything like this. I've been meaning to look into health insurance options for a while, but I hadn't done anything about it recently. And I definitely didn't need home renovations or assisted living services. As for college or investment management, those were completely out of left field. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the sleep, and opened up the next text, and then another. Each one felt like a new layer of confusion. There were dozens of messages, all coming in from different companies, offering services I had never asked for. It wasn't just the texts. My voicemail inbox was full. I quickly checked the number of missed calls, more than a dozen, all from various numbers I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it might have been some kind of mistake, a wrong number or maybe even a scam. But when I checked the voicemail messages, it was clear these were real companies, all asking me for follow-ups on inquiries I had supposedly made. Still half in shock, I tried to dial back one of the numbers, a health insurance company. I needed to get some answers. I asked the person on the other end how they had gotten my information. And the response was eerily similar every time. "We received your inquiry last night between 10:30 p.m. and midnight." Wait, what? That was the same time frame I had been at the park, having dinner and playing games with my family? So how could I have possibly been submitting forms at that time? Confused, I ended the call and tried another. Same story, same time frame, same vague answer. Everyone kept repeating, "We received your inquiry form last night. All of your personal information was included." It felt like a sick joke, but I couldn't figure out who would find it funny. I had been completely calm and peaceful, doing absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. Who would go to such lengths to disrupt my life? But then things got even weirder. I glanced at my phone once again, and there it was, a post on Craigslist. The title, "Free Stuff, Everything Must Go." The listing wasn't anything out of the ordinary, except for the fact that my personal phone number was in the contact section. And when I looked closer, the listing was made within the past few hours. That's when the full scope of what was happening began to sink in. Someone had spent time making sure my phone would be blowing up all morning. The fact that my number was posted in a free stuff ad, with no context and no actual items to claim, made it clear that this was intentional. Someone was intentionally trying to disrupt my life, but why? And how? It felt too personal for it to be a random act, but I couldn't think of anyone who would do something like this to me. I was getting messages, calls, and notifications left and right. Every single one linked back to some form of information that had been submitted online. Whoever was behind this had to know a lot about me. My full name, my phone number, my personal preferences. By this point, I was no longer just confused. I was genuinely bewildered. I had done nothing to provoke anyone. There was no falling out with a friend, no argument with a coworker. I couldn't even think of anyone in my life who would have had any reason to do something like this. And that's when the weirdest question hit me. What had I done to deserve this? It wasn't like I had a history of making enemies or stirring up drama. I'm the type of person who stays out of conflict. I work from home, volunteer for the school's art program, and spend time with my kids. My life isn't anything out of the ordinary, just a simple, straightforward existence. So why was someone so invested in making my life a chaotic mess? I spent the next few hours in a daze, trying to make sense of what was happening. My phone hadn't stopped ringing, and each new notification seemed to bring more confusion. I tried to shake it off, thinking I was just overreacting to something that could be explained away. Maybe it was a prank, or some glitch in the system, or even a mistake that would sort itself out once I contacted the companies. But deep down I felt like there was something more to it. I wasn't sure who was behind it, but I was starting to suspect that I was the target of something far more intentional than I'd initially thought. Whoever was responsible was relentless, and the fact that they had my personal information made it feel like a personal attack. I had tried to sleep through the chaos, but the buzzing of my phone was too persistent. I gave up and decided I needed to tackle this head-on. I would get to the bottom of it, no matter how long it took. The first thing I did was check my email. Maybe I thought there might be something there to explain why this was all happening, but there was nothing. Just the usual newsletters, notifications, and a few reminders from the kids' school. Nothing out of the ordinary, so I turned back to my phone. I needed to start making calls. I tried to focus on the health insurance inquiries first. I figured that would be the easiest place to begin, as it was the first thing that had come through. After all, who knows? Maybe I had accidentally submitted a form, though I couldn't for the life of me remember doing so. I dialed the number that had left a voicemail earlier. It rang twice before someone picked up. "Hello, this is Taylor from Greenway Health Insurance. How can I assist you today?" "Hi, I received a text message saying I submitted an inquiry about health insurance, but I don't remember doing that. Can you tell me when I filled out the form?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Sure. It looks like we received your inquiry last night, between 10:45 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. You provided all your personal details, including your phone number. Is everything okay? Would you like to move forward with a consultation?" My blood ran cold. The timeline matched exactly with when I had been at the park, eating dinner and playing games. There was no possible way I had filled out any form during that time. And yet, here I was, dealing with the fallout of someone else's actions. "No, I'm afraid I didn't submit anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you know how you got my information?" The person on the other end hesitated for a moment. "I'm not sure. It could have been pulled from another service you've used. Perhaps you're on a list for various services or inquiries?" I was getting nowhere. I tried not to let my frustration show. "Well, thank you for your time," I said, hanging up. There had to be another explanation, something I was missing. I scrolled through my messages again, looking for clues, but there was nothing that stood out. Just more texts and more calls, each one from a different company, all following up on inquiries that I had no memory of making. I tried a different approach. I went back to the Craigslist post. Maybe there was something there, someone might have left a trail. It wasn't just the fact that my phone number had been posted. It was the fact that the ad had been created with no explanation. If someone was behind this, there had to be some way to track it down. I clicked on the link to the post and scanned the details. There was no mention of who had posted it, no email address or any other identifying information. The post itself was simple: free stuff, everything must go, call for details. And there, right at the bottom, was my number. I tried to search for any other posts like it, hoping that maybe I could find another clue. But there was nothing. It was as if someone had made the post for the sole purpose of using my phone number. It hit me then. Someone was intentionally making my life miserable, filling up my voicemail box, clogging up my phone with calls and texts, and creating fake ads online. The fact that they had all my personal information made it clear that this wasn't some random act, it was something far more calculated. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a simple mistake. Someone had carefully and deliberately made sure I woke up to a storm of chaos. I was starting to lose my patience. My mind was racing as I tried to figure out what I could do next. Who would do something like this? Who had the motivation to target me so ruthlessly? I thought back to the night before, trying to retrace my steps. I hadn't seen anyone suspicious at the park. I hadn't interacted with anyone new. My life was quiet. I wasn't involved in any kind of drama. So why me? Why had I been singled out for this bizarre form of revenge? That's when it hit me. The only people who would have access to my personal information were people I trusted. Family, friends, maybe even colleagues. I hadn't had any major fallouts or arguments, so what had triggered this? Could it have been someone I knew who was holding some kind of grudge? My mind went through the list of people in my life, people who had access to my information, people who I had interacted with recently, but nothing stood out. It was like looking at a jumbled puzzle with no clear picture. I took a deep breath and tried to clear my mind. If I wanted to solve this, I couldn't get distracted by wild theories. I needed to stay focused, figure out where I had gone wrong, and trace the source of this strange revenge plot. At this point, I felt more like a detective than a mom trying to start her day. I wasn't just confused anymore. I was starting to feel paranoid. Was this someone I knew personally, or was it a complete stranger who had somehow gotten a hold of my information? I had no idea. I checked my phone again, half expecting to see another flood of calls and messages. But there was nothing new for now. Just a few more notifications about various inquiries. It was almost like I was in a holding pattern, waiting for the next wave of chaos to hit. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I started searching my inbox, my old forms, and any potential places where my information might have been compromised. I checked with my credit card company and my bank to ensure there had been no breaches. Then, I remembered something strange. About a week ago, I had received an unsolicited email from a company offering to help with home renovation. It wasn't anything that seemed off at the time, just a generic ad that had landed in my inbox. But maybe, just maybe, it was part of a larger scheme. Could that email have been the entry point for whoever had hijacked my information? Was that how they got my details in the first place? At that moment, everything started to feel connected. Maybe it wasn't personal, but the sheer amount of effort put into this filling out forms, posting ads, calling me meant it was something more than a simple prank. But one question remained: why me? As the morning wore on and the constant barrage of calls, messages, and emails continued to flood in, I started to feel the weight of it all. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a full-blown problem. Someone had targeted me, and they were going to extraordinary lengths to make sure I paid for it. But who and why? The confusion was starting to turn into something else: suspicion, maybe even paranoia. But I couldn't afford to let those feelings take over. I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to dig deeper. I decided to start by retracing my steps. If someone had somehow gotten my personal information, then I needed to figure out where it could have been compromised. The first thing I did was review any recent transactions, forms, or subscriptions I might have signed up for. Could I have unknowingly given my information to the wrong person or website? It seemed unlikely, but I had to rule everything out. I went back to the unsolicited email I had received a week ago, the one offering home renovation services. At the time, I had dismissed it as just another spam message. But now it seemed suspiciously timed. Could that email have been part of some larger scam? Had someone been fishing for information? I opened it again and read it closely. It wasn't anything particularly out of the ordinary, just a generic ad offering discounts for home renovations. But it didn't explain the Craigslist posts. How had someone gotten my number posted there? I spent some time researching the company that had sent the email. A quick online search showed that it was a legitimate business. At least, it appeared to be. There were customer reviews, testimonials, and even photos of completed renovation projects. But the more I dug, the more I realized something unsettling. Some of the reviews mentioned unsolicited phone calls and emails. A few even complained about receiving follow-up messages from the company long after they had unsubscribed from their list. It was a red flag, but I didn't have enough information to draw any definitive conclusions. Next, I tried to retrace any other online activity that could have exposed my details. I went through all my recent subscriptions, forms, and inquiries. I hadn't signed up for any new services or used any new websites recently. At least not any that would explain this. But there was one thing I had done a few days earlier, something that could have been the key to unlocking this entire mess. I had tried to get a quote for health insurance. It wasn't something I had planned to act on immediately, but the idea of shopping around for better rates had been on my mind. So I had filled out a form on a comparison website to see what my options were. I hadn't given it much thought at the time, and I certainly hadn't expected it to lead to this. I wondered if this was how my information had been leaked. I went back to the website and tried to recall every detail of the form. It had asked for my name, phone number, email address, and a few basic health-related questions. That was it. It seemed innocent enough. But could someone have hacked into the system or sold my details to another company? I decided to contact the health insurance comparison site. I found their customer service number online and called, hoping to get some answers. When the representative answered, I explained the situation as calmly as I could. "Hi, I recently filled out a form on your site to get health insurance quotes. But this morning, I've been receiving a ton of unsolicited calls, texts, and emails, mostly for services I never asked for. I was wondering if my information could have been compromised when I submitted the form." There was a pause on the other end before the representative spoke again. "I'm sorry to hear about your experience," she said, her tone sympathetic but not overly concerned. "I can confirm that your information was submitted through our site. But we don't store any sensitive data like bank account numbers or social security numbers. We do, however, share the data with our partner companies to help provide you with quotes." "Okay," I said, my heart sinking. "So my information could have been shared with third-party companies?" "That's correct," she replied. "We work with a number of insurance providers and other related services to get you the best quotes. But we don't have control over what they do with your information once it is shared with them." My mind raced. There it was, the loophole. I had unwittingly opened the door for my personal details to be passed along to countless companies. But it still didn't explain the Craigslist ads. Who would go through the trouble of posting my number for free stuff? I needed a new approach. I turned back to the Craigslist post and began searching through other free listings in my area. I knew it was a long shot, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had posted my number had done it deliberately. It wasn't just a random ad. It was meant to get my phone ringing off the hook. I spent an hour combing through various listings in my area looking for anything suspicious. It wasn't until I came across another listing, this one posted just hours after the first, that I started to feel like I was onto something. The second listing was eerily similar to the first. "Free stuff. Everything must go. Contact my number for more information." But there was something different about this one. At the bottom of the post, someone had included an email address, info@freeitemsforyou.com. I clicked the email link, and it opened a new tab. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the website. It was poorly designed and looked like something thrown together by a beginner. But what caught my attention was the message that appeared on the homepage. "For your convenience, we're offering free stuff in your area. Contact us for more details." There were no actual items listed, just a vague promise of free stuff. I immediately knew something was off. I copied the email address and ran a search. It didn't take long before I found a few threads from people complaining about a scam that involved free items and fake Craigslist ads. The scam was simple: post fake listings with a contact number, and then bombard you with spam, trying to sell everything from cheap electronics to shady home improvement services. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The person who had targeted me had likely used that Craigslist post as a cover for a larger scam. They had posted my number to generate more traffic to the site and collect more leads for other companies. My phone wasn't just ringing because of the health insurance inquiries. It was ringing because my number was now tied to a scam operation that used free stuff as bait. I couldn't believe what I was uncovering. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but there was still a lingering question. Why me? I wasn't involved in any kind of major business or legal dealings that would make me a target for fraud. I didn't have any enemies, or at least none that I was aware of. My life was pretty quiet, so why would someone pick me for this elaborate scheme? I felt like I was getting closer to an answer, but I knew I couldn't stop now. The deeper I dug, the more convoluted it seemed. But one thing was clear: whoever was behind this had put a lot of time and effort into making my life miserable. And I was getting closer to figuring out just who they were. The investigation had begun to take its toll on me. What started as a minor inconvenience, a flood of unsolicited calls and texts, had now become a full-fledged emotional roller coaster. At first I had been calm, detached even. It was like I was just an observer, watching this strange situation unfold. But now, as the hours wore on, I was starting to feel something much deeper: confusion, anger, and yes, even fear. It wasn't just the constant stream of messages, or the fact that my phone was practically glued to my hand as I sifted through details. It was the underlying feeling that someone, somewhere, was out to get me, for reasons I still didn't understand. And every call, every voicemail, every text was a reminder that I was being targeted in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. The most unsettling part was the isolation I felt. It was hard to explain to people what was going on. On the surface, it looked like a typical case of spam, or a hacker trying to sell my information to the highest bidder. But I knew better now. This wasn't just some random attack. Whoever was doing this had taken the time to dig deep into my life. They had access to my phone number, my name, my personal details. They knew enough about me to make everything feel eerily precise. And that made it so much worse. I tried talking to my husband about it, but he just couldn't grasp the scale of it. He listened, sure, but he had been working all day at the martial arts event. When he came home, tired and ready to relax, he didn't seem to understand why I was so shaken.
He was worried, yes, but his frustration didn't match mine.
He was upset on my behalf, but his empathy seemed shallow, like he couldn't fully comprehend what was happening. I could see the concern in his eyes, but I could also sense the disconnect. He hadn't been there when I woke up to a phone full of unsolicited calls. He wasn't the one who felt like they were under attack in a way they couldn't control. And it wasn't just the inconvenience. It was the feeling of powerlessness, the gnawing sensation that my privacy was being violated, and my life was being invaded by some unseen force. I realized too late that I had underestimated the emotional toll this would take. At first, I'd brush it off as a minor annoyance. Sure, it was strange, but I figured it would pass. I figured I'd be able to handle it. After all, I'm a grown woman with a family and responsibilities. But the deeper I dug into this mess, the more I started to feel like I was being suffocated. Every unanswered call made me feel more and more like a puppet in someone else's game. The phone calls were the worst. The constant buzzing. It felt like they were coming from all directions: companies, scammers, numbers I didn't recognize, numbers I thought I recognized. It was hard to know who was legitimate and who was just another part of the web someone was spinning around me. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a spike of anxiety shoot through my chest. Was it just another health insurance agent? A home renovation company? A debt collector? Or was it something worse? Every time my phone rang, I had to brace myself, waiting for that moment of confusion and dread that came with every new call. And it wasn't just my phone, it was my email inbox too. The endless flood of notifications felt suffocating. I couldn't keep up. I was now in a race against time, trying to keep track of the messages that mattered, while sifting through the ones that were just part of the noise. But the worst part was that it all felt so impersonal. These companies had my name, my phone number, my details, but it all felt like a faceless operation, something designed to make me feel small, insignificant, and powerless. But it wasn't just the constant barrage of digital noise. It was the emotional toll that came with it. The frustration of not knowing who was behind this or why. The gut-wrenching realization that someone had spent hours crafting this elaborate scheme just to make me miserable. It was like being trapped in a psychological puzzle with no answer. And I had no idea who was pulling the strings. As I sifted through my life, trying to figure out who could be responsible for this, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. Was it someone I knew? Had I unknowingly crossed someone, pissed them off enough to spend hours of their own time making sure my life was thrown into disarray? I started second-guessing myself. Had I said something to upset someone? Had I unknowingly hurt someone's feelings? I tried to think back to every interaction I'd had recently, but nothing stood out. I was a work-from-home mom who volunteered for the school's art program. I wasn't involved in anything particularly controversial. I kept to myself. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how deeply unsettling it was that someone would take the time to do this to me. They had taken hours of their night to submit forms, post fake ads, and hijack my personal information. Who does that? And more importantly, why? That's when the anger started to creep in. The constant uncertainty, the way my life had been turned upside down, the feeling that I was powerless, it was all starting to make me angry. Not just at the person who was doing this, but at myself. Why hadn't I been more careful? How had I let this happen? I was mad at the situation, but I was also mad at myself for feeling so vulnerable. There was no way to stop it. No way to undo what had been done. I just had to endure it. And then there was the exhaustion. I couldn't keep up. Between answering calls, deleting texts, trying to figure out who was behind this, and keeping everything together for my kids, I was spent. I was emotionally drained, physically exhausted, and mentally tapped out. It felt like my entire existence was now defined by the chaos that had been brought into my life by someone I couldn't even identify. I was snapping at my kids more than usual. I was short with my husband, not because I was mad at him, but because I didn't know how to process what was happening. I was snapping at everyone, feeling like I was drowning in a sea of frustration. I couldn't escape it. Every time I tried to step away from my phone, it buzzed again. Every time I tried to take a breath, something new came in. I couldn't get away from the feeling that I was stuck in this endless loop. There was also the constant, nagging fear that came with the whole situation. Not just the fear that someone was harassing me, but the deeper fear that I was being watched. That I had no control over my own life anymore. I didn't know how far this person was willing to go, or if it was even over yet. What if it escalated? What if they showed up at my house? The worst part was that I had no idea who they were. No face, no identity. Just someone who had access to my life and was determined to make it as difficult as possible for me. As the days dragged on, I started to withdraw. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to explain what was happening because I was too tired of saying the same thing over and over again. I just wanted it to stop. I wanted to feel like myself again. To live in a world where my biggest problems were scheduling school activities or figuring out what to make for dinner. But instead, I was stuck in a nightmare of unanswered calls and endless confusion. It was hard not to feel like I was losing control. And when I realized that I was getting physically sick headaches, stomach aches, the works, I knew I had to make a change. I couldn't let this situation define me. I had to get to the bottom of it, yes, but I also had to take care of myself. I had to find a way to detach from the emotional strain, or it would consume me. So I took a step back. I decided to put the investigation on hold, at least for a few hours. I left my phone in another room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I took a deep breath. I focused on my kids, on the things that mattered, and slowly started to reclaim my peace of mind. But it wasn't easy. As the hours passed, I felt a slight shift in my mindset. The anxiety was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but I began to take back some control. I realized that, while I couldn't stop the chaos from coming at me, I could choose how I reacted. I could choose to let this break me, or I could use it as a lesson. Maybe that's the silver lining. I wasn't the first person to deal with petty revenge, and I wouldn't be the last. But this time, I was determined to get to the bottom of it, not just for the closure, but for my own peace of mind. Whoever was behind this had taken enough from me. It was time for me to take something back. The following days felt like a blur. My life had been turned upside down, and I was now living in a constant state of vigilance. The calls, the texts, the emails, they hadn't stopped. They were relentless, each one a new reminder that my privacy had been shattered, my life interrupted. But despite all of that, I knew I was getting closer to understanding what had happened and, more importantly, who had made it happen. I had already considered the possibility that this was some elaborate form of petty revenge, someone, somewhere with a grudge. But who? And why me? I still couldn't put the pieces together, but the more I dug, the more patterns began to emerge. The break in the case came one afternoon, when I was reviewing the same health insurance inquiry forms I had submitted. For the umpteenth time, I found myself staring at the companies listed in the responses, trying to match them to anything I had ever interacted with. There was one particular company, Health First Insurance, that kept appearing on the call logs and texts. Something about it seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. I opened up the health insurance comparison website I had used, hoping to revisit the form I'd filled out. It had been a simple process, a few basic questions, nothing I would have expected to cause this much chaos. But when I logged in and went back to my history, I noticed something strange. There, right at the top of my recent inquiries, was a company I had never heard of, Better Life Healthcare. It wasn't listed in any of the previous emails, and it wasn't a name that had appeared on any of the calls or texts. Yet the company's name had been listed at the top of my health insurance inquiry. Wait a minute, I thought, that's not right. I was sure I hadn't submitted anything to Better Life Healthcare. In fact, I didn't even remember seeing it listed as an option when I filled out the form. It was as though someone had injected it into the process on my behalf, deliberately making sure it showed up as one of my inquiries. I quickly searched for the company online, hoping for any trace of its existence. What I found sent a shiver down my spine. The website was generic at best, no contact information, no physical address, just a get a quote page and the reviews. There were none, not even a mention of this company anywhere. In fact, it seemed almost too quiet, as if it had been intentionally hidden from view. That's when it clicked. Someone had created a fake company, a front just to make my inquiry form look like it was legitimate. It was a carefully crafted setup. The moment I had filled out my health insurance form, they had injected this fake company into the mix to create confusion, make me look like I was the one submitting fraudulent information, or perhaps even try to make it appear as though I was submitting forms to every random service available. But why? What was the point of all this? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting closer to the truth, but the pieces just wouldn't align. Still, this was a breakthrough. I needed to dive deeper into Better Life Healthcare to see if there was any link between the company and the fake Craigslist posts, or any hint as to who might be behind it. I spent the next few hours obsessively searching for any clues. My mind was racing. Was this the work of a disgruntled person I knew? Or was it someone with a more nefarious motive, using my personal information to set me up as part of some larger scheme? Eventually, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A forum thread, a discussion about fake health insurance companies and scams. The forum post was buried under dozens of others, but one comment caught my eye. It mentioned Better Life Healthcare and linked the company to a string of similar complaints. The user claimed that Better Life was a front for a larger operation that used unsolicited health insurance, inquiries to harvest personal information, and spam people with offers for home renovations, job recruitment, and other services. The comment went on to explain how they had been contacted by multiple companies after filling out a seemingly legitimate health insurance form, and how it had all started with a misleading too-good-to-be-true offer that they couldn't resist. It was exactly what I had been experiencing. Could it really be this simple? My blood ran cold as I realized what was happening. The scam was using my personal information to sign me up for all sorts of services I never asked for, just to make it look like I had done it. But who was running the scam? And how had they gotten my personal details? I had to go deeper. There was still too much I didn't know, and now I had a clear lead. I returned to the health insurance comparison website and dug through my inquiry history once again, looking for any connection between Better Life Healthcare and the other companies that had been reaching out to me. Then I noticed it. The exact same time frame that I had been told about earlier, the inquiry had been submitted between 10:30 p.m. and midnight. And that was the exact same window during which I had been at the park, having dinner with my family, playing games. The timeline matched perfectly. It became clear. Someone had been online at that time, submitting fraudulent inquiries in my name. They had taken my personal information and used it to sign me up for health insurance, home renovations, job recruitment, and more. But why? Why go to such lengths to ruin my day, my peace, my sense of security? I leaned back in my chair, trying to think. Then it hit me, who had I interacted with recently? Who had access to my personal details? I had gone through my list of people in my head 1,000 times, but there was still one person I hadn't considered. The answer hit me like a punch in the gut: my brother-in-law. I had known him for years. He was my husband's sibling, a guy who was always around at family gatherings, someone I considered a part of the family. He wasn't someone I'd ever had an issue with, and in fact I thought we were close. But when I dug deeper into his recent activity, a few things started to click. My brother-in-law had recently started a side business. It was supposed to be a simple marketing consulting gig, but I now realized how easily he could have accessed my personal information. He was the kind of person who had access to everyone's contact details in the family, always keeping tabs on the latest business trends and opportunities. He had probably seen me researching health insurance online and used it as a perfect opportunity to help me by signing me up for a bunch of things, without ever asking. But it didn't stop there. He wasn't just helping. No, he was using my name and information as part of a larger plan likely to drum up business for the companies involved in this scam. He had probably planted fake inquiries and Craigslist posts as part of his broader marketing strategy, using my personal information as collateral to make the operation seem more legitimate. I felt a sinking sensation in my stomach as I pieced everything together. It made sense now: the time frame, the random services, the fake company, and the fact that it was all happening at once. My brother-in-law had used my information to kickstart his side business, thinking he was helping me or maybe even seeing it as a way to drum up business. But instead, he had created a nightmare for me. He had crossed a line. I wasn't sure what to do next. I could confront him, of course, but would he even admit it? Would he take responsibility for the chaos he had caused? Or would he try to deny it all and make me feel crazy? The decision weighed heavily on me. But one thing was clear: I had been targeted by someone I trusted. Someone who knew my personal details and had used them without asking. And that was the part I couldn't get past: the betrayal. I felt like I was trapped in a surreal version of reality, where I was unsure who to trust anymore. And the worst part, I realized I wasn't just angry at my brother-in-law, I was angry at myself. How had I let this happen? How had I not seen the signs earlier? All those innocent family gatherings, all those casual conversations. In hindsight, I should have known something was off, but now I had the proof. I had everything I needed to confront him. And finally, after days of confusion, frustration, and exhaustion, I was ready to take action. The truth was out there, and I had uncovered it. But the journey wasn't over yet. I still needed to face my brother-in-law, get the answers, and make sure this never happened again. But one thing was certain: I would never look at my family the same way again. The trust that had once been there, now shattered, would take years to rebuild. The discovery of my brother-in-law's involvement in the scam was both a relief and a heartbreak. Finally, the pieces clicked into place. The relentless calls, the mysterious inquiries, the fake Craigslist ads, everything was now explainable. But knowing the truth didn't make it easier to swallow. In fact, it made the whole situation feel even more surreal. The person I had trusted, a close family member, had orchestrated the chaos that had disrupted my life for days. And I had no idea how to process it. I needed to confront him, and I knew it had to happen sooner rather than later. Every time I thought about the situation, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. How could I face him? How could I look him in the eye after everything he had done? He just some stranger pulling a prank or running a scam. He was someone I considered family, someone I thought I could trust. But now that trust felt like it had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. I decided to speak to my husband first. He was the one who would have to deal with his brother, and I needed his support. I couldn't go through this alone. After dinner that evening, I sat my husband down. He could tell something was wrong. He'd seen me spiraling for days. But I hadn't been able to find the words to explain the full scope of the situation. I had tried, but it was hard to articulate how deeply violated I felt. This wasn't just about a few annoying phone calls. It was about betrayal, about someone in my life using me as a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. "Babe, I need to tell you something," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "It's about your brother." His eyes narrowed in concern. "What happened? Is he okay?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I've been getting all these calls, texts, emails, and I couldn't figure out where they were coming from. But I think I've finally figured it out. I paused, the weight of the revelation sinking in. "Your brother was behind it all." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. My husband's face shifted from concern to confusion, then to disbelief. "What do you mean? Are you sure?" "I've traced everything back. The health insurance forms, the home renovation inquiries, the fake Craigslist ads, it all points to him. He was the one who used my personal information to create this mess. He's been running a scam, using my details to generate leads for his business." I could see the shock in my husband's eyes. He was processing the information, and I could tell it was hard for him to wrap his head around. This wasn't just a random mistake, it was a calculated act of betrayal. "But why would he do that?" he asked quietly. "Why use your information? Why make it so personal?" "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Maybe he thought he was helping. Maybe he was trying to drum up business for his consulting gig. But whatever the reason, he crossed a line. He used my details without asking, he invaded my privacy, and now I'm stuck dealing with the fallout. My husband's face grew darker as he digested the information. He was silent for a long moment, clearly torn. "I'll talk to him. I'll get to the bottom of this. You don't deserve any of this, and I won't let him get away with it." In the following days, we had a few tense conversations about how to handle the situation. My husband was hurt, angry, and disappointed in his brother, but he was also trying to figure out the best way to deal with him. He knew that confronting his brother would be a delicate matter. The last thing I wanted was for this to turn into a family feud. After all, I had to live with the consequences of this for a long time. When the time came, my husband sat down with his brother. The conversation was difficult. He asked him directly about the scam, about how he had used my personal information to sign me up for random services and create fake posts online. At first, my brother-in-law denied it. He couldn't believe it. But as my husband pressed him, it became clear that he was struggling to explain himself. Eventually, he admitted what had happened. He'd seen the health insurance inquiry form I'd filled out online and thought he was being helpful. He had added his own business to the list of leads for insurance companies, hoping it would lead to some new opportunities. But it didn't stop there. He'd gone further, creating fake ads on Craigslist, using my number as a point of contact, all in an attempt to generate more leads for his business. When my husband asked him why he didn't just ask me for my permission, his brother seemed genuinely confused. He had thought he was doing me a favor, helping me out. It wasn't malicious in his eyes, it was just business. But that was the problem. My brother-in-law had crossed a line between business and personal. He had used my information without consent, without any regard for how it would affect me. In his mind, it was a harmless gesture, a way to drum up business. But for me, it was a violation of trust, a betrayal. After that conversation, things were never the same. My brother-in-law apologized, but it didn't change the fact that he had put me through hell for days. I couldn't just let it go. He didn't seem to understand the gravity of what he had done, but I couldn't forget how much anxiety and stress he had caused me. We tried to move forward, but it was difficult. I couldn't stop replaying the events in my head the moment I woke up to hundreds of messages, the confusion, the anger, the helplessness. I had spent so many hours wondering who had done this, why they had targeted me, and how I could make it stop. I never imagined that the answer would be someone I considered family. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on the experience in ways I hadn't expected. The ordeal had taken a significant emotional toll on me, and I knew it wasn't something I could easily forget. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just the scam that had hurt me. It was the fact that I had trusted someone who had so easily violated that trust. I had spent so many days feeling powerless, as though my privacy had been taken away from me, as though I was at the mercy of someone else's actions. But I also realized that I couldn't let this define me. I had to take back control over my life and my peace of mind. It wasn't easy, it took time. But I slowly started to rebuild my sense of trust, not just in others but in myself. I learned to be more cautious, to question everything, to protect my personal information more carefully. I became more aware of the potential dangers that lurked online, the ways that even seemingly innocent actions could be exploited. And while I wasn't able to completely repair the relationship with my brother-in-law, I learned to set boundaries. I learned that it was okay to stand up for myself, to speak my mind when something felt wrong. I couldn't let anyone, no matter how close they were to me, cross those lines again. In the end, this whole experience had left me with a complicated mix of emotions. There was relief, certainly. The mystery was solved, the source of the chaos had been identified. But there was also a sense of loss, a feeling that something precious had been damaged beyond repair. Trust, once broken, was not easily rebuilt. But the most important lesson I took away from it all was this: never underestimate the power of protecting your privacy. Never let anyone, no matter how close they are to you, cross that line without consequences. And perhaps most importantly, don't let someone else's actions take away your peace. You are in control of how you respond, and that is where your strength lies. As time went on, I learned to move forward. It wasn't easy, but I found a way to heal. The damage had been done, but I wasn't going to let it define me. I had been tested, but I was stronger than I had ever realized. What would drive someone to such lengths? Is it worth it to get caught up in this petty cycle of revenge? Or do we just move on, wiser and more cautious? Let me know what you think about this crazy story and how you'd handle something like this. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.